The collision itself was bad enough. When two Chinese warships collided with each other while taunting a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, it was one of the most embarrassing examples of friendly fire in recent years. But the collision has also raised questions about the supposed might of the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN for short, and in particular, the quality of the ships that make up the largest navy in the world. Basically, they may not exactly be shipshape. The collision took place on August 11th, 2025, in the contentious Indo-Pacific region where China is assuming an increasingly aggressive stance. Footage posted by the Philippine Coast Guard shows a Chinese Coast Guard, or CCG, Type 056 corvette in hot pursuit of a Philippine Coast Guard vessel. The corvette then suddenly tries to make a turn to starboard, as if in preparation for the collision. Suddenly, a Type 052D destroyer comes into view as the chase unfolds. At high speed, the Chinese Coast Guard corvette attempts what the Philippines later described as a risky maneuver from the starboard quarter of the BRP Suluan. Instead of cutting off the Philippine vessel, the corvette slams into the bow of the destroyer, damaging its forward deck. Philippine officials later claimed that 2 Chinese sailors were killed in the incident, while video shows CCG crew scrambling to throw fenders off the side just before impact. If the Type 052D warship had hit either of the other 2 vessels, the damage to these smaller-hulled ships would undoubtedly have been catastrophic, potentially leading to sinking and significant loss of life. After all, the comparative differences in displacement of the Type 052D destroyer and the Type 056 corvette are vast, at around 7,500 tons and 1,500 tons respectively. In addition, the 2 ship classes have considerably different lengths, at around 525 feet for the Type 052D and 295 feet for the Type 056 corvette. In addition to the questionable management skills of the 2 ships' crews, the collision has also raised questions about the quality of the PLAN's ever-expanding fleet. As we mentioned, in terms of overall numbers, if not quality, the PLAN already has the largest navy in the world, and the gap between it and its nearest rival, the US, continues to widen. Some analysts have suggested that this collision demonstrates that while the PLAN may hold the lead in terms of quantity, when it comes to quality, it still lags far behind the US, and that might make all the difference if the 2 navies were ever to clash substantially. Let's dive into why that quality might be lacking. More than 45 years ago, China was considered one of the poorest countries in the world. In 1978, around 85% of the population lived in poverty, with a GDP per capita of just $229, roughly 46 times lower than that of the US. Its military, while boasting a standing army of around 2 million personnel, was filled with outdated and shoddy equipment. Then in 1978, the paramount leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Deng Xiaoping, commenced his reform and opening up policy, which initiated market-oriented reforms, opened the country to foreign investment, and established special economic zones. A remarkable transformation followed, which, according to the World Bank, saw over 800 million people lifted out of poverty in half a century, with the GDP per capita growing 59 times to over $13,000. This phenomenal economic growth, when measured in terms of purchasing power parity, or PPP, makes China by far the largest economy in the world, some 30% larger than the US, which it pushed into second place in 2014. The growth has been fueled primarily by an industrial and manufacturing boom that has seen China labeled as the factory of the world. In 2021, China's factories generated $3.7 trillion real manufacturing value added, more than the US, South Korea, Germany, and the UK combined. It's currently producing 3 times as many cars as the US and even produces almost as much beer annually as the US, Russia, and Germany combined. Over the years, China's manufacturing output has expanded from primarily low-end consumer goods like plastic toys and toenail clippers to increasingly high-end and technologically advanced products like smartphones, computers, electric vehicles, and robots. In the process, Chinese industrial and engineering prowess has also improved tremendously. There's still an awful lot of dodgy construction in China, nicknamed tofu construction, due to the flimsy nature of the building's walls. But there's also plenty of evidence that China is capable of world-class engineering feats. A case in point is the Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge in Guizhou province. At 2,050 feet above sea level, it's set to become the world's highest bridge, having successfully completed a load test with 96 heavy-duty trucks, totaling 3,360 metric tons in August 2025. No Western bridge currently under construction or recently completed comes close. The same is true when it comes to high-speed rail technology. Already, with nearly 30,000 miles of operational track, no Western nation, besides arguably Japan, has a high-speed rail network that can match China's scale, speed, or density. In July, Chinese rail titan CRRC started final testing on the world's fastest hydrogen-powered train. Expected to be operational in 2025, this bullet train is anticipated to reach speeds of up to 155 miles per hour with zero emissions. Again, nothing in the collective West comes close. Another case in point is the Beijing Institute of Technology's recent unveiling of the world's first cyborg bee. The world's lightest brain controller, weighing just 74 milligrams, is strapped to the bee's back and controls its movements, making it suitable for tasks like military reconnaissance or search and rescue in disaster zones. It's not yet available in the world's first 6S robot store, which opened in the city of Shenzhen in Guangdong province in July, but there's much else being done to suggest that the Chinese robotics industry is in a robust state of health. China also leads the world by far in terms of cutting-edge mobile technology like 5G. The nation already boasts 4.2 million 5G stations compared to the US's 270,000. Now it's just unveiled the world's first all-frequency 6G chip. The technology is capable of delivering mobile internet speeds of over 100 gigabits per second across the entire wireless spectrum, including those frequency bands used in remote areas, according to a study published in the journal Nature. That's 5,000 times faster than the average in remote regions of the US. Of course, the same levels of technological and engineering know-how have been applied to the Chinese military, at least on paper. In 1978, before Deng's reforms began, the PLA was more or less a joke, particularly for a nation with well over 1 billion people. Today it's regarded as the world's third most powerful military, behind the US and Russia. It's also regarded as one of the most technologically advanced, with cutting-edge innovations being showcased nearly weekly. In July and August 2025 alone, China showcased a fully 3D-printed all-terrain military drone, capable of operating on land, sea and air, a new tailless stealth wingman drone, the brand new AWACS-type KJ-3000 long-distance high-tech surveillance warplane, the LY-1 shipborne laser for intercepting both drones and missiles, and the truck-mounted OW-5A50 next-gen laser air defense system, capable of vaporizing and jamming low-flying drones at distances of up to 6 miles. It also unveiled the Rain of Pear Blossom Needles bomb, containing 550 to 660 pounds of razor-sharp tungsten needles, capable of shredding almost anything without major explosions, and a graphite bomb designed to disable power plants and transmission lines. With a warhead weighing around 1,080 pounds, this bomb reputedly releases 90 submunitions that disperse carbon fibers to trigger short circuits and can cause a complete power blackout over at least 105,000 square feet. That's an impressive output, whichever way you look at it. The pace of Chinese innovation could even be viewed as intimidating, provided, of course, that all of this gear actually does what it says on the box. In some cases, that's proven to be the case. China's J-10C fighter jets, for example, have long been pilloried in the West as vastly inferior to fifth-generation Western analogs like the US's F-35 Lightning II or French Rafale. However, during the brief clash between India and Pakistan earlier in 2025, Pakistan's J-10Cs were reportedly able to interfere with the Indian Rafale's advanced radar and communication system. As a result, the Chinese planes allegedly brought down up to 3 of the much more vaunted and costly French jets. The PLA has undoubtedly put enormous effort and budget into radically overhauling its air forces, air defenses, electronic warfare, missile and drone capabilities. But arguably the biggest improvements in its military capabilities have come in its navy. According to the US Defense Department's year-end annual China Military Power Report of 2024, the PLAN is now the largest navy in the world, with a battle force of over 370 ships and submarines, including more than 140 major surface combatants. A report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies stated that in 2024, the PLAN operated 234 warships, compared with the US Navy's 219. That doesn't tell the full story, though. The US has an advantage in guided missile cruisers and destroyers, as well as overall tonnage, thanks to its fleet of 11 aircraft carriers versus China's 3. China did commission its latest massive Type 075 helicopter carrier, the CNS Hubei, in August, the 4th since 2021, but these can't be compared to the US's enormous, multifunctional Nimitz-class carriers that can carry a variety of attack aircraft as well as helicopters. The US's Ohio-class submarines are also considered to be in a different league than anything the Chinese can put to sea. Nonetheless, China has 307 active shipyards compared to perhaps a couple dozen in the US, with 35 of those actively involved in military shipbuilding as opposed to the US's 4. One report indicates that in 2024 alone, the Chinese shipbuilding industry built more commercial vessels by tonnage in 2024 than the entire US shipbuilding industry had since World War II. The result is that at present, China can roll out 3.1 of its Type 052D destroyers annually, while the US is only capable of producing 1.6 of its Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the nearest analog to the Type 052D. The US is duly concerned about the growing strength of China's naval power and particularly about the growing output gap. As former US Secretary of State Kurt Campbell put it, "Look at the difference in shipbuilding between the United States and China. Deeply concerning. We have to do better in this arena, or we will not be the great naval power that we need to be for the 21st century." But does the quality of the warships China is churning out warrant the concern? With traditional Chinese sailboats going by the name junk, could today's PLAN be stocking its fleet with expensive, high-tech junk of a different kind? One analyst who comes to that conclusion on the basis of the collision between the two Chinese warships is a blogger who goes by the pen name That Guy Noah. Noah makes a compelling case that the damage to the Type 052D as a result of the collision shows that these ships aren't anywhere near as safe and effective as they're made out to be. The Type 052D is considered to be the backbone of the PLAN. There are around 25 in active service, including 13 standard variants and 12 Type 052DLs, with more under construction at the Dalian and Jianghan Changjing shipyards. Dubbed the Chinese Aegis due to its advanced radar and combat systems, the new vessel is a multi-role guided missile destroyer designed for blue water operations, equipped with cutting-edge sensors, weapons, and communication systems. The ship emphasizes stealth with a reduced radar cross-section achieved through an inclined superstructure and integrated mast. It's powered by a combined diesel or gas turbine propulsion system, providing a cruising range of 5,178 miles, sufficient for regional operations in deep blue waters. The destroyer's most notable feature is its 64-cell vertical launch system, or VLS, arranged in 32 cells forward and 32 aft. These are capable of firing a diverse array of missiles, including the HHQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missile for air defense, the YJ-18 supersonic anti-ship cruise missile, the CJ-10 land attack cruise missile for precision strikes, and the CY-5 anti-submarine missile. The Type 052D also includes a 130mm HPJ-38 naval gun for surface and land targets, a Type 730 or Type 1130 close-in weapon system for point defense, an HHQ-10 short-range SAM system, and 2 triple torpedo launchers. The ship's 4-panel AESA radar system known as Dragon's Eye provides robust air and surface surveillance, capable of detecting and tracking multiple targets simultaneously at ranges of several hundred miles. Additional sensors include the Type 364, Type 366, and Type 517B radars, as well as the SJD-9 hull-mounted sonar, SJG-311 variable depth sonar for anti-submarine warfare. The Type 052D also employs the Joint Service Integrated Data Link System, which is equivalent to NATO's Link 16, and the Naval Common Tactical Data Link for enhanced interoperability with other PLAN assets. On paper, it's an impressive ship, and one of the few in China's fleet capable of projecting power in blue waters. Indeed, it can be argued convincingly that for all the growth in its naval power, China is still heavily reliant on the US Navy to protect its fleet of container ships as they lug consumer products of every shape and size to destinations around the world. In his assessment of an image showing the damage to the front of the destroyer, which is badly buckled to the point that the ship looks unsailable, Noah suggests that since the ship had slowed right down before the moment of impact, the extent of the damage can only be due to poor construction, or at least the use of inferior materials. He points to the fact that China is a communist country and that historically, communist nations tend to focus on quantity rather than quality, with poor quality products the result. In the Second World War, for example, he says a single, high-quality German Tiger I tank was able to take out numerous Soviet Union platforms of around 12 mass-produced, low-quality T-34 tanks. The Soviet Union went for quantity over quality. Now, he says, based on evidence, China is going the same route as the Soviet Union did. He also suggests that the comparative difference between the displacements of the Arleigh Burke and the Type 052D also suggests the use of lightweight steel in the Chinese ship. The Arleigh Burke DDG-51 at full load capacity weighs a massive 8,300 to 9,700 tons, while the Chinese ship is said to only weigh 7,500 tons at maximum loads. While the Type 052D only has 64 VLS launchers compared to the DDG-51's 90, that gap can only account for a small portion of the roughly 2,000-ton difference in weight. As Noah reasons, US warships have been built with very strong framing. Some would call it over-engineering, but as a democratic country and a country that values the lives of people and their safety on those ships, maximum survivability of its sailors was the biggest priority. You can't say that about China's 052D variant. And if these ships can't handle a relatively light blow from a much lighter ship, he adds, they wouldn't be able to handle any from a strong opponent like the US. Ultimately, he concludes, I'm very skeptical of how the Chinese Navy would perform in actual combat against a strong navy. Their ship would immediately sink. There wouldn't be even enough time to repair anything if you were hit by a VLS cell. Weak framing generally translates into broader damage. There is one minor problem with Noah's analysis. It's based on a flawed premise. You see, the image upon which Noah bases his entire thesis doesn't in fact show the damage to the Type 052D destroyer. Rather, it shows the damage to the other ship involved in the collision, the CCG Corvette. which had rammed the much heavier destroyer head-on. The actual damage to the Type 052D is much less severe. It's the kind of damage one would expect to see on a well-built warship that's just been rammed head-on by a 1,500-ton corvette. And frankly, the buckled hull of the corvette is precisely what one would expect to see when a much lighter ship hits a much heavier, better reinforced vessel. The real damage done to the Type 052D does not provide any evidence that this ship is poorly constructed with subpar steel, or that the PLAN cares less for the lives of its sailors than the US does. The Dent also does not indicate that China has gone the same way as the Soviet Union, or that Chinese ships will sink as soon as a US missile or drone touches them. There are other issues with his analysis. While politically the Soviet Union and modern China share much in common, both being one-party states, economically they're worlds apart. The Soviet economy, and indeed the Chinese economy before Deng's reforms, was entirely centrally managed and deeply inefficient as a result. Today, the Chinese describe their system as socialism with Chinese characteristics, and those characteristics also involve large-scale private enterprise and a distinctive capitalistic streak. As for efficiency, without wishing to discount the many major problems the Chinese economy faces, its economic growth over the past decades speaks for itself. Does this all mean that Chinese warships are incredibly well built and something that the US should be panicking about? Of course not, but it doesn't indicate the opposite either. With regards to the Type 052D, more discerning analysts, such as those at National Interest or Naval Technology Journal, treat the ship with considerably more respect, regarding it as a formidable challenger to the Arleigh Burke-class. The truth is, we just don't know yet how the majority of the Chinese fleet, or indeed the vast majority of its other newfangled weaponry, will perform in actual battle conditions, because very little of it has any experience of real war. Besides low-level skirmishes with the Philippines in the South China Sea and on the Indian border, China hasn't been involved in a substantial conflict since the early 1990s. One of the last wars it was actively involved in was the Vietnam War. After the war ended in 1973, cross-border skirmishes with Vietnam continued until the late 1980s, when they gradually ceased. It could well turn out that much of China's navy is in fact a bunch of floating junk, no match at all for the US's smaller but technically and technologically superior fleet. However, until there's more serious evidence than a dent, the relentless output of military innovation from China suggests that the US's official position of taking the Chinese threat seriously is the prudent approach. As always, we'll keep you updated as more evidence comes to light, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so you don't miss out. And thank you for watching.